Hello and welcome to the Made for More podcast. It's me, your host, Ali Nitschke, leadership communication expert and the future of work when it comes to AI. As you know, I am a passionate believer of courageous leadership that builds culture and that changes everything. And that is what we are going to be talking about today. We are diving into the conversation that every leader, every executive, and every team member needs to hear as we head into the next year, 2026. We are talking all about culture. Now, when it comes to culture, I'm not talking about the posters on the wall or the buzzwords in your strategy document, but the real lived experience of your workplace. This is all around how people feel, how they behave, how they show up every single day. Speaking of showing up, I am showing up. It is hot here. I reckon we're about 90% humidity today, and I've had the electrician in doing, electrician things. So no power, no lights, and no AC. So I'm feeling hot and bothered. My face is melting off, but the show must go on, as they say. When it comes to things like culture in a world of hybrid work, which is where we are right now, we've got AI disruption. We've got five generations in the workplace. Listen to some of the past episodes if you're curious about that and how that impacts how we show up. But culture isn't just a nice to have. It is the ultimate competitive edge. Now, you have probably heard the phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast, which is true. However, last year I wrote a piece around if culture eats strategy for breakfast, then strategy set the table. And I still think that is true to date. It is one of those lines that gets thrown around in the leadership circles, but let's unpack what it actually means. So you could have the smartest strategy, the boldest goals, and the most beautifully designed business plan. And as we know, business plans tend to stay for a while in the design space. But if your culture is disengaged, if it's toxic, or perhaps it's even burnt out, none of that will stick, which becomes problematic for you as the leader. So, culture is what happens when no one is looking. It's how people behave when the pressure is on. It's when things go wrong. It's when people are tired. It's when they're uninspired, or perhaps it's even when they are inspired. Now, if you've been following along for a while, you will know that I got my stripes in banking and finance. I was very lucky to land there after my professional ballet career. And one of the things that still stands the test of time, and when I'm saying stands the test of time, that was 20 odd years ago that I started in banking and finance. The people that I used to work with, we still talk about the culture of the good old days. It was one of those amazing, like an alchemy of, the culture, the people, the timing, everything back in that era. And it's like decades ago now, which obviously I started when I was 4. But really, it was one of those cultures that people loved, they thrived in, and it's still talked about today how good the culture was. And I think for right now, culture, it's under pressure like it's never been under pressure before. Under pressure. But what we're seeing is, I was going to sing that song and then realized I didn't know the rest of the words. So you're welcome that I didn't have to do some karaoke on the podcast. That would be confusing. But what we're seeing is the rising burnout rates. It's happening more prolifically than it has ever happened before. As you probably know, if you've heard some of these before, I had burnout when I was 26. Before it was cool. This was quite a while ago, before everyone was talking about burnout. We've had a couple of guests on the podcast rather, that have talked about burnout. So burnout rates are rising, and whether they're rising or whether we're hearing more about it, I think it's probably a two-pronged approach. We have got generational friction between expectations and values when we're looking at the convergence of 5 generations in the workplace. Of course, with the introduction of Gen Z in the workplace, Gen Z, depending on how you learn how to say your Zs, is becoming more and more prolific. There's an episode on Gen Z, or the multi-generational friction points that are happening. So listen into, oh, I reckon it's maybe it's a few episodes previously, but look up the generational changes. And I also think where culture is starting to really experience some pressure is roles are being rewritten overnight. And I'm not saying as in job roles are being rewritten overnight, but people's understanding of what their job roles are, of what their job roles are going to be, are absolutely being rewritten. And it's something that, depending on which way you slide, I'm a glass half full kind of gal. So I'm like, oh, what's the opportunity? How can I clear some space to do the things that I love doing? Or there could be some people that are feeling quite anxious, quite stressed about potentially, air quotes, losing their jobs. All of this can really impact culture, how people show up, how they show up under pressure, how they show up in times of excitement, as well as in times of change. So the question isn't, do you have a culture? Because every organization does. In fact, there's even micro cultures within teams, within organizations, just to make it a little bit more complex. But the real question is your culture working for you? Or is it working against you? And I think that is probably a different way of thinking and looking at culture. Are we all rowing in the same direction? Is it working for you? Or is it not working for you? Is it working against you? And it's one or the other, right? It's either working for you or it's working against you. So being able to identify that is really, really key. And then going, okay, how do we shift that? Obviously, if it's going in the wrong direction, how do we shift that to bring everyone together so that our culture can be working for us, for our future, and where we want to be going? And you might be wondering why culture matters right now. I think let's just have a little look at the landscape of what's happened over the last couple of years. There's some Gallup's research from 2023, which found that organizations with highly engaged cultures see a 21% higher profitability, as well as a 41% lower absenteeism. Now, we heard the term quiet quitting, that kind of came about around this same time. And we know that people that are engaged are far more likely to obviously show up to work, to participate in meetings, are to have a high level of output as well. And when it comes to this kind of data, it's not fluff. It really is the kind that, your CFO pays attention to. It is the stuff that really impacts the bottom line of any organization. So engaged cultures that attract some of that top talent, that retain great people, that drive the innovation, they're the ones that we want to, or they're the types of cultures rather, that we want to be creating. Those toxic cultures, and everyone has ever seen one, heard one, participated in one, they are the types that really just leak energy, they leak reputation and profit. And you know what? It sucks going to work when there's a culture that is not conducive to optimal engagement, I think. So when we're thinking about how does this all get impacted when it comes to AI, of course it does, because we are in the age of AI, of automation, of algorithms. What sets companies apart isn't their tech. Everyone can have the same tech stack. What sets companies apart is their team, the creativity, the collaboration, and the trust that people bring to the table. So all of these humanistics, humanistics parts of leadership, of culture that cannot be replicated by a team stack. So culture is what turns that strategy into action. And I think it really is the difference between compliance and commitment. And it's between the difference between surviving and thriving. And when cultures are strong, people don't just show up, they actually step up. And I think now more than ever, we are needing people to step up, step into leadership, whether they are leading teams or even just leading themselves, but actually take that vulnerable step forward to take some radical accountability for the way that they do show up at work. So some of the shifts that I think leaders really need to make in terms of culture is recognizing that culture is the new competitive edge. And you might be wondering what that means for you. I think there's probably three big shifts that are happening over the next 12 months, and I'm talking 2026. And that is that culture is lived, not laminated. So it is easy to create a glossy poster and brand values that sound good in a presentation or perhaps an alliteration. And, thank goodness we've got innovation in there and trust and, it's all very same. But a culture isn't defined by what's written, it is defined by what is witnessed. And if you are a leader, being able to role model the way for that is absolutely imperative. So if you say things that we value as an organization, as a team, is innovation, but you actually punish mistakes or don't encourage mistakes, then your people will learn that playing it safe is actually the real culture, which is not conducive to innovation at all. If you talk about well-being, but reward burnout. So this is places where, we are rewarding those that respond at 10 o'clock at night, for example, on the emails, or rewarding those that are, really in that hustle culture. That's not really well-being. Your people are learning that exhaustion equals excellence. And I would really question if that's what you're trying to demonstrate. Culture isn't what you declare, it is what you demonstrate. And being able to demonstrate that as a leader is absolutely key. Something else to consider when it comes to culture is that culture is shaped in those micro moments. Now, I've spoken a lot about micro moments over the years, and this is absolutely imperative. So, I'm a professional speaker. I speak at conferences. I speak at annual events. Speaking is a huge part of my business, of one arm of the business. So, I speak at big events. I speak at town halls. I speak at industry association events, and thinking about this, going, that absolutely matters when it comes to culture. But culture is also created in the small moments. So it's the macro and the micro, and how leaders handle conflict, for example, how they give feedback, how they celebrate effort, or perhaps even ignore the whole thing, is what builds those micro moments when it comes to culture. So every single meeting, every decision, every email, it's all culture in motion. You can shift culture faster than you think you can when you start noticing those moments and leading them intentionally. Now, that's not to say that we don't need to bring everyone together every year, because I think that's an important part of belonging when it comes to, particularly with remote work, but looking around those people, we get energized by people in the room, and hearing from others across the business. So important. But I think we need to understand that it's not just that in isolation. So you can't have just the micro moments in the office or within your team, and you can't have just the large get-togethers, that conference, that offsite. We need to have both. We need to have the macro and we need to have the micro, so that you can really start shifting the culture and creating the culture that you want. So being really intentional about that as well. And I think something to think about when it comes to cultures is that they need to evolve with the context. So hybrid work, we've talked about it. We've been talking about it for years. It's here to stay. It's here to stay. I'm not going to get into, how many days a week is good. I've spoken about this before in other episodes. Go listen to that. But what we do know is that there is a shift in the way that we need to be approaching that type of work. And when we're talking about evolving with context, the context here is individualization. So not individualization at a business level. Again, this is at that micro level. What do your individuals need to thrive? When it comes to generational diversity, are you aware of what is required within your team, within your business, within your organization? Do you understand the nuances between different generations and how they are going to relate to each other? Because that is going to impact the culture as well. And as you would be aware, AI disruption is rewriting the rule book. So what has worked previously, and I'm not just talking, in the last 2 years. I'm talking probably the last 3 decades, I think. Yeah, we'll go with that. I think leadership has been fairly steady for the last 3 decades. It is now changing quicker than it has ever changed before. So, what worked in 2019 is not going to cut it for 2016. So, if you are serious about your leadership, if you are serious about creating a brilliant culture for your organization, really focusing on what that new rule book will mean for you, for the business, for your clients, the ripple effect that that will have, because we are leading teams that are they're distributed far and wide. They're demanding more meaning. So I'm no longer available to just tick and flick. I'm no longer available for a cookie cutter. Please help me make sense of what it is that I'm meant to be doing. What is the purpose, and is it purposeful? Culture now needs to flex, it needs to be inclusive, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be adaptable for constant change, because that is the world that we live in. So if your culture can't evolve, your people will, and they'll evolve all the way out or straight out the door and say, see ya, don't let the door hit you on the way back. Sorry, not on the way out. So being really aware that if your culture cannot evolve, people will out evolve your culture, and you will no longer have some of your top talent. You will no longer have some of your brilliant people, because, you're not evolving with it. And I think one of the parts to really consider here when it comes to culture is that it takes a lot of courage to lead culture. As you know, I talk about courage a lot. It's the stuff that feels icky and you do it anyway. So here's the part that takes the real courage. Many leaders underestimate culture until it costs them, until the people leave, until engagement drops, until their best talent burns out, or their reputation takes a hit. So creating culture with courage, or being courageous enough to create that culture, is no longer for those that are a wait and see approach. It needs constant attention, constant checking in. Are you in the right spot at the right time? Are you making the right macro and micro moments matter? And I've also seen the opposite as well. So leaders that invest in culture early, they're the ones that really, they prioritize the clarity. They prioritize accountability and belonging, belonging to the team, but belonging to the bigger purpose of the organization. These are the leaders who model vulnerability, they model that care, and of course, consistency, which is so, so important. For those leaders that are doing it well, they're the ones that really build the workplaces that people choose to stay in. And I think that's key there. They choose to stay. And those choices drive the performance, the loyalty, the innovation that we talked about earlier as well. Because culture isn't about being nice. You can hear some of my earlier episodes on being nice versus being kind. It is about setting clear expectations and holding people, including yourself, to those expectations. It's about creating that environment where people feel safe enough to speak up and supported enough to step up. So important. And the leaders who get it right are the ones that really see results that ripple far beyond, the balance sheet. They're the ones that see people that are really thriving in their job roles. They're thriving in their employment. They're thriving in the organization. And the ripple effect that that has to your clients, to your customers, to any of your key stakeholders is absolutely profound. So if you're listening to this and you are in a position of influence, and we're all in a position of influence, I want you to ask yourself, what am I tolerating that's quietly eroding our culture? Where am I leading by example? And where am I leading by exception? How am I showing my team that culture isn't a poster, it's actually a promise? And that's the difference when it comes to the courage to lead culture. When we think about the future and where it's going, looking ahead, culture will be the ultimate differentiator for how people choose where they want to work, where they want to engage, how much they engage. And in a world where everyone has access to similar technology, similar products, similar information, and how you lead your people becomes the only thing that competitors can't copy. So strong culture is one of the things that equals strong brand, and strong brand equals loyalty, both from your customers and clients, as well as your team. So, as we move into 2026 and beyond, those leaders who invest in culture will find themselves with teams that innovate, that collaborate, and perform at their best. Not because they have to, but because they want to. So, the leaders that don't find themselves stuck in this endless cycle of hiring, firefighting, catching up, which, if you've been there, you know it is a real drag. The choice is clear. Make sure that your culture is, whether it's eating your strategy or whether it's fueling it, that one is up to you. You can probably hear my children have just arrived and it is time to wrap this episode up. So, culture isn't the soft stuff, it is the edge. It is not someone else's responsibility. It is absolutely your responsibility. And when you build culture where people feel safe, where they feel valued and purposeful, performance really does follow that naturally. When people know that they're safe and that you really value them and that they belong and that they matter, it is so, so important, because people don't give their best because they're told to. They give their best because they want to. So, as you look forward and toward 2026, please remember that culture is not the soft stuff. Culture isn't a department, it is a daily decision that you need to make every morning when you wake up and walk into the office, sign in. You are creating those micro moments of culture. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Made for More podcast. If you liked it, share it with your friends. Don't forget to hit subscribe. If today's episode really resonated with you, please reach out and let the team know, because culture really does set those organizations apart. I'm Ali Nitschke. As always, here's to courageous leadership, meaningful culture, and workplaces that matter. Bye for now.